This is the Big Douglas Show, and my guest today is the host of the Pro Football Fantasy Football Podcast, Ian Hartitz. Ian, how are you, my man?
Doing great, man. I'm pumped to see, the entire fantasy community really starting to get back into the swing of things, as someone that is pretty much, tweeting or watching highlights every single day of the year. I never quite turn it off, but I'm happy to see, we got the public, the quote unquote casuals come back, who I'm not trying to use that term, as an insult by any stretch. I'm just happy. There's football talk in the air. My Twitter is full of random meaningless training camp reports. Great day to be great. And here we are.
Oh, I love it. So I love asking these questions to the guys that kind of do this year round, and it certainly has become more year round. How many leagues are you currently in, and how many more do you got coming down the pipe?
I think last year my in-season redraft needing to adjust rosters every week total was 10 or including dynasty. I think it was 10 or 11. I'm trying to get that down to 8 to 10. For years I was only 3 or 4. Some guys like Dwayne McFarland, who's on my podcast a lot, of PFF Fantasy Football Podcast, he's in 70. So I'm not one of those people that are just in a zillion FFPC leagues or anything, or MFLs or anything like that. I do enjoy dabbling more in the best balls, but you're one and done with those. So hoping to settle in around 8 this year.
The best ball is really kind of taken over. Are you a purist? Do you kind of prefer the old way of doing things? Is there room for all of them? Where you kind of sit on that? Do you have a favorite way of doing it?
I think there's room for all of them. I kind of enjoy each of them. I've just began the dynasty more in the last 2 or 3 years, and I've really enjoyed that. I mean, you have your whole squad, and it's definitely, almost tougher for me because I have, my just favorite players, my Auden Tates, Cordero Pattersons. And when you have these 30, 35 player benches, I see one of them on the waiver, and it's like, well, I mean, I can't just let them be sitting here as a free agent right now. What kind of friend am I to these guys? But no, I just think the dynasty, having the longer term view with things, and the startup drafts are so just kind of there's so many different things to think about. I really enjoy the dynasty side of things. Probably would still have to go redraft number one. Best ball is fun just because drafting is, I think, that most people's favorite parts of the thing, and for us to be able to just do the one and done and get out, always a good time. And it's pretty easy to do the streams throughout the off season, which I think people like. Honestly, though, I think I still am more of a DFS guy at heart. My come up was really with Fantasy Labs, Jonathan Bales, Peter Jennings helped teach me a lot of the stuff that I know today. And just, I guess having the week to week nature, everything resets, having the whole pricing part of it to examine. I just feel like, DraftKings, FanDuel, wherever you want to play, I'd never run out of things to really analyze in that. And the fact that it resets itself so quickly every single week. I mean, it's just one of those things where you can know as much as possible about real life football, even fantasy football. But if you're not, really tapped into which guys or values are not based on their price tags, it can change everything.
Do you have a favorite football team, or does doing so much fantasy kind of stray you from doing good?
I am a Cowboys fan. I have had to become, much more objective over the years. I would say, I'm still an ignorant Ohio State fan, but with the Cowboys, more and more, I just root for the players over the teams. But I don't think my mother would let me say anything other than Cowboys. It's funny. I'm in between moves right now, so recording this from my mom's basement. Certainly not planning on staying here much longer. But usually, there's over my right shoulder, there's a Cowboys clock and stuff like that. I had to take it down last week because I had Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver Mike Williams on the podcast, and I didn't want to be ticking him off with any Cowboys propaganda in the background. But it's funny, man, because I grew up, I'm an Ohio lifer, and some people might be saying, "Oh, how can you not be a Browns fan, Ian?" As someone that is 28 years old, I have seen 2 Cowboys playoff wins in my entire life. So I have suffered just as much as a lot of those Browns fans.
You have not done it for the wins.
Right, exactly. So don't call me, this bandwagon front runner, just a situation where my mom, spent about a decade in Dallas. Her whole family was always the fans. When you grow up and there's just a bunch of Cowboy stuff in the household, you become a Cowboys fan.
That's right. And I thought it was interesting. I love when you get the players on. Sometimes interviewing the players, can go a certain way. You never really know. You had Antonio Gibson on, and he was great. How did that interview go for you?
Yeah, Gibson was awesome, man. You said it, man. Like it's funny. I got a podcast coming up at 3 with Rich Rebar, and I have 10 questions planned for him. And I'm sure like I'm gonna have to really work to get those 10 questions within 60 minutes. First player interview I did, I had 10 questions and I finished them, and I was like, how are we only 8 minutes into this thing? Like it's just different, man. They are professional football players, and I'm so thankful they are willing to give me even 20 minutes to talk. But it's an entirely new conversation. I've gotten more nervous for the player ones, and I have doing podcasts in years. And but no, Antonio Gibson, I would say Mike Davis, Mike Williams, a lot of these guys I feel like do come on just willing to talk about things, but the more you can help them and not one thing I realized pretty quickly, I think I was talking to DeAndre Swift, and I was like, hey man, so like more snaps in the slot out wide, like what do you think your role is going to be? And what are they going to say? They just say what they should say. Like I'll do whatever coach will ask me to do. I'll do what's best for the team. So just learning to what questions you can kind of get the most out of them, get their thoughts on some of their college buddies that were out there, get their thoughts on just regular league events is great, because a lot of these guys, they're not fantasy football fans necessarily. No one I've talked to dislikes it per se. They're just kind of new to it and don't exactly play. So the more you can tap into just what makes them a football fan, and then what kind of players they really like growing up and stuff like that, I find that gets the best kind of conversation going with them.
Antonio Gibson certainly seems to be the fantasy football darling this year. Where do you see him getting drafted? And if they start throwing him the ball more, which the offensive coordinator, I think, has said he plans to, it really should be a good year for him.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, look at my ranks right now. He is my RB13, and that feels honestly just a little bit low, all things considered, because his ceiling is as, first we were going with a DC CMC nickname, but now I think we're just going with AGDC with the ripoff of ACDC. But Gibson, man, he has that potential. If they say, you know what, we want you to be our version of McCaffrey to get 80, 90 targets, and then he has legit top 5 upside. The question is, will McKissick be going anywhere? The guy led the position in targets last year in a fantasy football. Yeah. In fantasy football land, man, we want those targets more than anything. I was actually surprised. Targets are actually over the past 10 years more correlated with fantasy points than overall touches are. Like that's how freaking it's by 0.01. So they're both very correlated, but rush attempts, man, really just don't matter as much as a lot of people think they do when we're talking about some of these backs with the receiving upside. So Gibson, man, I think he's talented enough, to do more with 300 touches and other guys. The question is going to be just how much of that target share he's able to wrestle away from McKissick. So right now, I think he's right in that range where if he's there in round 2, I am taking him every single time. Basically, I have right outside my right at my borderline, Najee Harris RB12, Gibson RB13, Clyde RB14. After that is about when I'm starting to go back to wide receivers and taking whichever top 12 guys are left there. But, I maintain if you can get 1 or 2 of those top 14 running backs this year, used to be top 15 before the Cam Akers injury, 2 of those top 14 guys, I think you're going to be very happy with that start.
And do you expect Henderson to take a big bump simply because of the Akers injury, or are you concerned that they'll bring somebody in for competition and ruin the draft slot?
I mean, it's certainly, it's not Akers. I didn't just replace, Akers with Henderson in the old fantasy ranks, because Henderson has only played more than 50% of the offensive snaps in 2 of his games. And McVay's even come out and said, like, they're not sure if he's, just has the durability to last the whole year. But he's also coming out and not signing anyone else, at least for the time being. One of my, regular guests on the PFF fantasy pod, Andrew Erickson, he's naming Adrian Peterson as the guy he thinks gets signed there before the season starts. And that is a risk, but I think the eventual veteran they bring in, even though McVay's saying they're not looking now, I think they will eventually bring in someone else just for numbers. But the type of player they bring in is going to be what's so important. If it's AP, that's not good. Now you're threatening Henderson's status as the lead early down back in this offense. If it's Duke Johnson or someone, as much as I love Duke Johnson, it's probably going to be okay, because now we're just looking at a scat back third down type of player in the system. So I think, it's going to depend on who they draft, but overall I have Henderson slotted in as my RB18, right around that Dave Montgomery, Dobbins, Swift, ETN tier. I just think that we're looking at an offense that most people probably project to be a top 12 scoring unit. And even if we're not looking at the same sort of 80, 90%, snap rate as Akers was going to get, it's still a pretty good situation to be in. Henderson right now, when I checked yesterday, had an ADP, I think, as the RB29 on Underdog. He was the RB29 in weeks 1 through 13 last year before Akers played more than 33% of the snaps for the first time. So, I always want to try to get in situations where we're seeing guys priced closer to their floor than their ceiling. Yes, Henderson has boomed up the boards, but I was expecting him to be flirting with his top 15 draft position. Where he's going right now, I'm all in.
What kind of bump does Stafford get by moving over to that Rams offense, if any?
Oh, it's huge, man. I just think things are gonna be so much easier for him. And I mean, people might not, give a shit what you and me have to say about some of these players with real life assets. We want to hear about the actual players. Like, what do, their peers think? And Aaron Rodgers, for him to come out, on that Pat McAfee show throughout this last year and just give Stafford all sorts of props for the things he's able to do throwing the football really stuck out to me. Because if you've, had the unfortunate privilege of watching the Lions over the past few years, you do see Stafford making just at least a couple throws a game that make you shake your head. I mean, that dude truly has a bazooka for a right arm. And it's a shame he had to spend so many years of his career, dink and dunking the Theo Riddick and Golden Tate. I love Golden Tate, but I mean, come on, we got a guy that can throw the ball over the moon. Let's see him do it a couple of times. But like I was saying, it's just going to be easier with the Rams, and we have some metrics, behind our funky PFF paywalls and all that can help demonstrate that. Since 2017, which is when McVay got in with the Rams ranked first in play action rate. The Lions 27th. Pressure rate, Rams are 12th, Lions are 15th. Screen rate, Rams are 7th, Lions are 14th. Drop rate, Rams are 2nd, Lions are 13th. Shifter motion rate, Rams are 7th, Lions are 27th. Targets to open or wide open receivers, Rams 4th, Lions 21st. Like, Jared Goff was able to be a legit QB1 for 2 years under Sean McVay. I'm confident Matthew Stafford, who was able to do that for, a good 5-6 years over the past decade, will be able to do it with better weapons inside a better offense on a much better team.
As a UGA lifer, it pained me to watch Stafford toil away in the trade. And when they had talked about Washington being in on the trade this year, I got all super excited, for not. We got Fitzpatrick, though. What do you think the ceiling is for Fitzpatrick as far as, fantasy value goes?
I mean, he could be 2021's premier late round quarterback. And they're going through, the motions of doing this actual QB competition in Washington. Maybe Taylor Heineke, just keeps playing because he played awesome in that playoff game. But that's not the only time we've seen Taylor Heineke play football over the years. And the fact that this is now Fitzpatrick's first situation in really 4 years where he hasn't had a Jameis Winston, a Josh Rosen, or a Tua, like a legit top 5 first round quarterback, like, of course they're going to bench him for those guys. Need to figure out what they had in them. But if you watched him over the past 3 years, he outplayed Jameis, he outplayed Rosen, he outplayed Tua, and now he's finally in a situation where he doesn't have, that quarterback behind him where we can just worry about who's the better quarterback. It's not like they're going to be playing Heineke, on a 4-4 contending team if they just want to see what they have in the guy. Like, we're past that stage with Fitzpatrick, which is huge because in those 3 situations, the guy's been nothing other than a fantasy QB1. In weeks 1 through 3, 2018, when Jameis was suspended, the QB1. In weeks 7 through 17, after they finally said, you know what, Josh, fun times, you're not our future quarterback, go back to the bench. He was the QB2, only behind Lamar Jackson in 2019. Finally, in 2020, weeks 1 through 6, before he quote unquote lost his job to Tua, he was the QB8. So Fitz is someone going outside the top 20. And I think if you find yourself, with a Justin Fields or Trey Lance, one of these guys where you worry about when exactly they're going to be on the field, Fitz and definitely Kirk Cousins, if he's still available, those are my 2 late round quarterbacks I'm really trying to pair with those guys.
I am not convinced at all, Ian, that Garoppolo starts the year. I think it's Lance. Shanahan had RG3 here. He knows kind of a way to bridge a quarterback like that. And I'd be stunned if they gave up all those picks and didn't play him week 1. What do you think the chances are there? I know that the coaches come out and said that Garoppolo is firmly implanted as QB1. I'm not buying it.
Yeah, how quickly the times change. A couple months ago, Shanahan wouldn't even confirm if Jimmy G was alive. Now he's trying to tell us he's for sure the starting QB. But yeah, you said it, man. It'd be a hell of a lot easier to believe if we didn't see 3 first-round picks swap, hands with this. And I just think Lance is such a different quarterback than him. Like, if they would have gone Mac Jones, I think it might have made more sense to wait. But like, they're not going to be running the same offense with Jimmy G versus Trey Lance under center. So it seems like it behooved them to get Lance out there sooner rather than later. It could be a little bit, but history tells us that little bit usually isn't all that long. Over the past 10 years, 19 of 23 quarterbacks selected inside the top 10 went on to start at least 10 games. And as much as Jimmy G isn't a bad quarterback, you look at his numbers. I mean, among 80 qualified quarterbacks last 4 years, the dude's second in yards per attempt, 11th in QB rating, 16th PFF passing grade. The thing is, he's 70th in big time throw rate, 74th in average target depth. And if you watch even just a few highlights from Lance, you know with that bazooka for an arm that he's got, that he's not going to be digging and dunking quite as much. Obviously, the rushing ability adds a new threat to the offense. I think Jimmy G is far better than your usual, incumbent starter for a team picking number 3. But again, based on those draft picks, based on the difference in quarterbacks, I think week 7 after their week 6 bye is the latest we'll see Lance. And if not, the one good thing is right after their week 6 bye, I think they have Cardinals, Rams, Bears, and the Colts. I think those are their 4 games. So 4 pretty tough defenses. I think that could be the point where we see, the true change happen, because, hey, if we get that, we just need that change to happen, honestly, before the final 6-7 games of the year, because the 49ers weeks 14 through 17 schedule, when we want our fantasy, playoff quarterbacks, they get the Bengals, the Falcons, the Titans, and the Texans, man. So that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We just need to try to get there. And that's why I'm saying, in the meantime, I think Fitzpatrick, Cousins can help you ride out that wave, because once Lance is under center, he's going to be a QB1.
It feels like Lawrence is the man that nobody talks about. Why do you think that is, and where do you see him?
Lawrence is, I think, a good example of the difference between having fantasy rankings, trying to win your league, and having fantasy rankings to try to win the Fantasy Pros ranking contest, because Lawrence is going to start 17 games, unlike Fields and unlike Lance. Because of that, we should expect him to score more total fantasy points. But is that really what we want overall? I don't think so, man. It's why we talk about points per game more often than overall points. And when all 3 quarterbacks are starting in week 10, we're probably going to want Lance and Fields, because they are just such more run first quarterbacks. And I'm not saying Lawrence can't run. I saw that dude go, 60 yards through the heart of my Ohio State defense back, in 2019 or whatever. He's got some wheels, but every single move from the Jaguars since the offseason started, man, has been rough. And, I wasn't discounting Urban Meyer coming there. I thought, okay, Urban in his later days at Ohio State, he really turned the offense over to Ryan Day, had more of the CEO role. And I could see that working at the NFL level. But since Urban's gotten there, he does the Iowa strength coach thing. That makes no sense. They had all this cap room, all these high round picks. They come away with Jamal Agnew, Marvin Jones, Carlos Hyde, Chris Manhertz, Travis Etienne, who they're now calling a slash, and Tim Tebow, who is still out there making headlines for some reason. And if Tim Tebow plays, if he makes a team and stuff, they are going to use him as a bullshit Wildcat quarterback inside the 5 or 10 in that annoying Taysom Hill-esque manner. And then finally, the whole Travis Etienne slash thing, I'm not really concerned about that for Etienne. If he's getting the receptions, that's great. I think he can do it reasonably well enough. What that tells me, though, is that Urban Meyer might be here to run his offense. And, credit to Urban for more or less, maybe not solely inventing the spread at Bowling Green, but really being the first guy, I think, to getting well with the read option. But when we saw the JT Barrett 2016 season and stuff like that, Ohio State passing game was broken. I don't necessarily trust Urban's offensive mind to lead him to success in the NFL. I trust maybe his CEO leadership ability, finding great athletes, finding great coaches to put the players in position and everything. But again, the more the decisions we see being made, the more it seems like Urban, the egomaniac he is, the decision maker where he needs to control everything. We see him just having his hands all over the organization. So all those factors for me just has me a little bit lower on Lawrence. And honestly, at the end of the day, biggest factor is just, again, Lance Fields getting more, I think, design rush attempts on a week-to-week basis.
When we look at the quarterback position, Ian, how do you – it feels like every year I'm like, wait, don't take quarterback early, and then I take a quarterback early. Where do you sit on that? Do you try to get value early, or just say, listen, there's not enough value, I will wait till the end?
Just depends on the draft, man. I was in one, mock, I think on Sleeper with some analysts, and I ended up taking the first quarterback. So it was like in round 5 instead of round 3. So I think a lot of times, with these 0 RBs and now our anchor RBs and just all robust RB, we all have these draft strategies, and people just kind of want to put their name next to one of them, really hang their hat on that. When in reality, take the value as the draft comes. If you see 5 wide receivers go off the board in the first 5 picks, I'd hope you take a running back first round and like not just stick to some plan that you started before. Like, as we get new information, we should adjust our plans accordingly, just like in fantasy football and any part of life, in my opinion. So the quarterbacks, I would say, I find myself, if I can get one of the big 5, Mahomes, Lamar, Josh, Kyler, Dak, if I can get them at a reasonable spot, I'm pretty happy. But otherwise, kind of like tight end, if I can get a tier 1 guy early-ish, great. If not, I'm pretty content to sit back and wait, because I think guys like Baker, Kirk Cousins, Fitz, and these rookies, Trey Lance and Fields and stuff, I think they do boast, legit QB1 upside as late as things are going for them. So, if we're doing 2 QB or super flex, it's different. I think then you definitely got to load up on these guys sooner rather than later. And then you can usually just get high-end dudes in the later rounds anyway. But I would say single quarterback league, if you can get a stud, do it. If not, just wait a little bit and scoop up, a great running back or wide receiver in those spots.
It feels like this year more than in the past, and maybe it has, and I just hadn't heard of it before, but everybody is talking about stacking. And so I'm curious which you think is the best stack currently.
I would say in stacking, in best ball, it's very important because we're trying to take down this $1 million tournament with hundreds of thousands of entries and all that. Redraft, maybe not quite as important. Like, I wouldn't necessarily, if you have Dak Prescott and it's like Amari Cooper versus Terry McLaurin, okay, we can probably get Cooper, but like, don't take, CeeDee Lamb over like DeAndre Hopkins just because you're trying to get a stack there. Maybe CeeDee does outscore Hopkins this year. I don't know. The hype's running rampant with him. I would just say overall, one stack that I was loving before the Julio Jones trade was Ryan Tannehill with AJB and those guys. A personal favorite stack, though, I'm just looking through the quarterbacks real quick. I would say probably Fitz. I would say a good one is McLaurin Fitzpatrick, and then you can actually run it back later with either Curtis Samuel or Logan Thomas. Curtis being there, man, being with an offensive staff that is used to using him. Scott Turner was his OC in Carolina as well. They know what he brings to the table. It's an offense that should be pretty condensed around their top 2 receivers. And then for Logan Thomas, as everyone knows, former QB, but for him to be an every down tight end, not just one of these guys that plays 50-60% of their snaps, and we got to kind of worry about if he's going to get, this specific touchdown on this possession. It's a more concentrated passing game than we're used to. And other than McLaurin, all of them could be had pretty cheap. So yeah, I would just say, in general, don't, break your back to stack these guys, but it's nice. It's a nice, useful tiebreaker.
Let's wrap with this. You mentioned the Washington stack. What does adding weapons do to, the receiver's target share? So, is this bad for McLaurin? Does the number say that it doesn't really matter? I'm always curious about that.
It's looking pretty damn good for McLaurin if he is as established as their number 1 as, we think he is, because Fitzpatrick, the one thing, even before he was this great, fantasy quarterback in recent years, even before then, man, he always found a way to get his number 1 receiver a high-priced second contract. Stevie Johnson, Brandon Marshall, Devontae Parker, most recently, all these guys were just getting fed by Fitz. In 8 years where Fitz has had double-digit starts, his number 1 receiver has had 128 targets, 128, 134, 137, 141, 146, 148, and 173 to old man B Marsh on one of those jet squads. So Terry, when you're that established as a number 1, I think it's okay, man. I hear some of these concerns, with the Bengals, Jamar Chase coming in and not hurting Higgins and Boyd. We need to consider too, though, like bringing more good players in the offense, even if it does shrink the target share a tad, there is a chance the efficiency goes up, like the Will Fuller effect. We'd see that in Houston. DeAndre Hopkins averaged more fantasy points per game with Will Fuller on the field than without, even though he had 2 fewer targets per game. He's getting those extra touchdowns touchdowns. So it's just one factor in anything. And like, I think, you know, we've been kind of a theme of this podcast is there's not this one be all end all way for evaluating anything. We all got to use it as a piece of the puzzle. So, you know, adding a new competition, great for the quarterbacks. I get it. We want 200 targets for all these receivers if possible, but similar to, you know, how most backfields these days have 2 or 3 running backs. There's only, you know, a few McCaffrey, Saquon, and Zeke's out there. There's only a few wide receivers, you know, in your Devontae Adams and your Stephon Diggs mold that, you know, are just guaranteed to be this, you know, 160 plus target hog. So for McLaurin, when we have an upgraded quarterback and then maybe just someone to help alleviate a little bit of attention from the defense, I think it's a rather moot point.
Ian, thanks, man. This was a whole lot of fun. Tell the folks where they can find you. What you got coming up next?
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Good time as always. Find me on Twitter at Hartitz, PFF.com, the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Got new articles, podcasts coming out every single day. We got about 6 weeks before the season starts, people. I cannot wait. We got preseason ball coming up. Going to be talking about all that fantasy draft strategy. Just, you know, football every single day because I love the sport, love the job. We're going to keep on grinding. But good talking to you, man. Best of luck to you and all the listeners in this season and beyond.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.